Welcome, everybody, to podcast number 273. Are you more confident in working overtime than you should be? Stay with us.
This is the Elevate Construction Podcast, delivering remarkable content for workers, leaders, and companies in construction wanting to take their next step. Get ready to step out of your comfort zone with Jason Schroeder as he encourages you to do better, live a remarkable life, and expect more. Let's go.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well. I am going to cover the truth about overtime. And this isn't like the single source of truth and, the end all be all. But this report is something that I got from a really good senior superintendent that I worked with out on the East Coast, who was given this information by some scheduling professionals, the company that they use. And this right here is a construction industry cost-effective task force report that came out in November 1980. I'm sure there are tons of other reports, but it was so eye-opening to me that I'm going to share it. One of the greatest things about having a podcast and putting myself out there on social media is that people start to share stuff and they start to correct ideas that I have, and they start to, basically the universe conspires to get more and more information my way. So we're going to cover that. I'm really excited about it because it's very eye-opening, and even if somebody didn't agree with me 100%, I think it gives us a better perspective on overtime, which also gives us a better perspective on flow. So I hope you're doing well, and I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. So real quick, what am I excited about in life? I'm excited about a company called Lean Survey, and Brandon Montero right now is producing videos on YouTube for Lean Survey and explaining very simply some of the most basic survey and field engineering practices. There are a lot of folks that listen to this podcast that are in the world of surveying, that are in the world of field engineering, and we all know that to create really good flow, really great projects, we have to have great layout. And so that YouTube channel is going to start to build. If you have any interest in that, please check out leansurvey.com next week because we'll have the website up. But in the meantime, you can check out the YouTube channel, Lean Survey. So really exciting stuff. You'll see more and more content coming in that direction. And in addition to Lean Tact, Spencer and I continuously put up content there. In fact, there's a new video coming up today. So really quickly, let's talk about our feedback from our listeners. Jason, I really enjoyed your talk with us on Thursday and can't wait to see what we all learn and how we use it. As a young person in a management role, I'm constantly looking for people to look to for help and sound lessons, and you're definitely one of them. In your podcast and in your talk, you referenced a ton of books, and I was wondering if you have a list of those. I'd love to increase my library and really dive into those works. Again, thank you for the talk, and I look forward to many more. So that was really neat feedback, so I copied that and wrote that down. That was really great. Here's some conflict for us. You can only do so much with overtime, and then it starts to hurt you. So let me give you two quick stories as I head into the rest of this topic. So when I listened to, I think it was How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie. I think that was the book. He talked about how the U.S. military found statistically that they could walk almost 50% to 100% more in a day if they gave their soldiers a 10-minute break every hour. And that is really true. There's only so much human capacity that we have. The other thing is I met a field director who is amazing, and specifically amazing at concrete. And he would always give me advice that you have to have the right crew sizes. If you have a wall crew, some people might say we need to go faster. Let's put 8 people on that and work them overtime. And he was like, hey, you get 5 really good carpenters on that wall crew with the labor and get them jamming in a flow. And you can get them to work 48 hours with that 5-person crew and really make some good production. And he's run some massive projects and knew that you might need an overall influx in manpower in the overall project, but you have to right size the crews and you have to work them the right hours. And that was the first time first time in my career that I had heard somebody say that, and it was eye-opening, and we started to experiment with it, and it was a game changer. So those were two things that got my mind headed in this direction and thinking differently. So let's go ahead and talk about that right now. So I'm accessing this report, and I'm going to read some of them. And so this was all written in a summary. If you wanted, I can email it to you. But I want to read. So if you hear me read a couple of these things and you're like, does that sound like it's in context? Please bear with me a little bit because I'm going to read snippets here. So I've highlighted this for the information that I want to cover. So here's a couple of things from the executive summary that this report talks about. Placing field construction operations on a project on a scheduled overtime basis disrupts the economy of the affected area, magnifies any apparent labor shortage, reduces labor productivity, and creates excessive inflation of construction labor costs without material benefit to the completion schedule. Where a work schedule of 60 or more hours per week is continued longer than about 2 months, the cumulative effect of decreased productivity will cause a delay in the completion date beyond that which could have been realized with the same crew size on a 40-hour week. Where overtime operations are deemed necessary despite productivity losses, for example, on remote construction projects, where bachelor housing is provided at the job site and on maintenance turnarounds, proper management can minimize the inflationary effects. Management actions to be considered include the use of additional shifts and periodic shutdowns of the work for a Sunday or a weekend. So I thought that was very enlightening. As we hear, and I realize that most of us advocate, or most crews will end up working 48 hours in a week, not 40. But the thought that when we start to work overtime, it disrupts the economy, meaning of the local area, and inflates the costs, and that when a work schedule works more than 60 hours per week, longer than about 2 months, it actually extends the duration of the project. Those were really insightful things to me. And the reason for, or at least some of the reasons, were the morale and fatigue factors in working excess hours. Whatever the reason, one fact stands out clearly. The longer the hours, the more scheduled work time is lost through absenteeism. Injuries increased as hours increased, not only in absolute numbers, but also in the rate of incidents. For hours above 8 per day and a 48 hours per week, it usually took 3 hours of work to produce 2 additional hours of output when the work was light. For heavy work, it took 2 hours to produce 1 hour of additional output. And so that again was enlightening to me, especially in consideration of the fact that we're talking about human discipline, meaning that when you have people working continuously, they are using their mental discipline to overcome what they want to do, or overcome their own fatigue, or overcome their own morale. And so I like the analogy of the rider, the elephant, and the path. The rider, only has so much strength. The elephant has much, much more, and the path has to be cleared. And so if we're in situations that are difficult, where we're tired, that rider is having to tell the elephant to keep pushing, keep going through, even amidst difficulty. And that rider is going to get exhausted, especially if the path is difficult. And that everybody has a rider and an elephant in their mind, so-called, in this analogy. And when we have workers pushing through exhaustion, they're losing that mental discipline, that mental capacity, which is real. Humans actually work like this. They're losing that capacity, right? And so in the study, it showed that in an 8-hour day, a crew was able to put together 120 pieces per hour. In a 9-hour day, it was 100 pieces per hour. And this is as we do this consistently. Now, that was a manufacturing example, but it still plays out. When operations are scheduled on a 7-day basis, management action can materially affect labor productivity. A study made at one factory showed that a substantially higher input resulted during the week following an off Sunday than the week following a work Sunday. And so what this means is it really comes down to capacity. Even when crews are asked to work a 7-day week, they had an uptick in productivity when they had a break. Just like we're going back to that example of the U.S. military. If they would, as they're marching, they can march so much farther if they give them a 10-minute break every hour. So the studies referenced in this report were based on observations for relatively short durations of 4 weeks or less. The construction studies discussed are based on longer periods of time. When a project in an area is placed on a scheduled overtime basis, the movement of workers from other projects in the area to the overtime job creates an auction atmosphere. Other jobs go to overtime to hold their labor, and a bidding process is established. The local labor supply is fairly constant, and the additional productive capacity of transient workers is offset by the reduced productivity of all workers on an overtime schedule. Usually, a major portion of the increase in numbers of workers in the affected area is a result of permit workers in the crafts who are less proficient or poorly qualified. Disruptions created by unwillingly or poorly qualified craft workers, longer working hours each week, increased absenteeism, and reduced effectiveness due to fatigue reduce the productive output of labor materially. On extended overtime, the reduced productivity of workers for a week's work is equal to or greater than the number of overtime hours worked. The premium cost for overtime hours plus the loss in productivity for the total hours worked results in an unreasonable inflation of the unit labor costs. There are charts here that I'm going to describe to you. They illustrate the effect of scheduled overtime on unit labor costs and labor productivity. There is no precise conclusion regarding the cost of overtime that is universally applicable. Time, local labor climate, management actions, and the job location are all factors which affect the cost, but they definitely increase. Within narrow limits, workmen expend energy at an accepted pace established by long periods of adaptation. When the hours of work per day or per week are changed, there is an adjustment period. Studies reveal that scheduled overtime operations result in a sharp drop in productivity initially, followed by a fairly substantial recovery by the end of the first week. The recovery level of productivity may then hold fairly steady for a period of 2 to 3 weeks, but show a steady decline for the following 2 to 3 weeks. After 5 to 6 weeks of operation, there is a further drop in productivity levels, and it hits a low point after 9 to 12 weeks of sustained overtime operation. It should be understood that this condition results from normal reactions and does not reflect the effect of other adverse factors such as labor, climate, and poor management. And so that decline is apparent, or it shows up with continued use of overtime. And let me go ahead. And so they talk in this report about, areas where overtime might be necessary, where you have, whether it's male or female bachelors going to remote projects and wanting to make hay while the sun is out, right? Or where there's a turnover, right? So working in remote areas or requiring basically shutdowns that are required, you might have to work overtime, but we at least need to know what happens. Now, management, if you have to work overtime, can do some things. Obviously, use travel or subsistence payments, employ additional shifts and different crews that can offset the amount of work, make sure that you have breaks and interruptions there that increase the crew's capacity, have a periodic shutdown, and then, an innovative approach is being applied to achieve 7 days a week, 10 hours a day. All right, so really quickly, I want to show you some illustrations. Talk about them. So when we look at the costs of this, it will end up at about At about 65 hours per week, you will start to at least pay twice as much as the original cost of the unit hour. Let me show you another graphic, or not show you, I keep saying that. The reduction in productivity is substantial at about 6 weeks. It starts immediately, but if there's a crew production on week 1 of 100%, and they consistently work 50 hours a week, on week 2 it goes down to 90%, then it goes back up to 92, 95, down to 92, and then it starts to decrease to 85 to 80%. So at week 6, working 50-hour weeks, you're at 85% capacity. At week 6, working 60 hours a week, you're at 75% capacity, and they continue to decrease from there. For instance, at week 12, with a 50-hour work week, the crew is at 72% capacity. Working a 60-hour week, you are at 62% capacity. I hope that made sense as I describe it. Here's another one. I think this is the last graphic that I'm going to show you. Yes, it is. Okay, perfect. So here was the other one that I thought was quite insightful. They charted a return on investment for overtime hours under average operations. And there's a line here that says, from a financial and from a cost and a schedule standpoint, when is there definitely no return on overtime hours? And so they tracked it at different, basically at different hours per week, but they all pretty much bottomed out at about, so like working above 60 hours a week for crews. There is no return on investment after 6 weeks. Working 50 hours a week with crews, 50 to 60, that was at about 7.5 weeks. Working above 40, above 40 hours a week, the return on investment reduces, it goes away at 9 weeks. And so the point here is that even if you are going to use overtime to recover a project, you can't do that consistently. So I want to say, in closing out this podcast, that I hope that my reading of this wasn't too choppy. It's a little bit difficult to extrapolate. I'm not giving myself excuses, but the current condition is we throw money and manpower at things to try and fix them. And all of the reports that I just stated didn't list any benefits, meaning all it's tracking, like if I said 9 weeks, somebody's like, oh, I can work overtime for 9 weeks. No. All of the negative adverse conditions still happen. They still happen within that 9 weeks. It's just after 9 weeks, there is no return on investment, even from a productivity or a completion standpoint. And so we have to understand that when we start to increase manpower, increase overtime, it increases costs, it increases safety issues, it also increases fatigue, and it starts to throw money out the window, and in most cases we're extending the overall project duration. So my challenge to you is to get your people in a flow with consistent people that are trained for the task, and make sure that you're working the right amount of hours with breaks for the people who are doing the work. And I hope this has been helpful. I'm not going to give you much more commentary above and beyond that. But I hope that's been helpful. On we go.
Please join us next time in elevating the entire construction experience for workers, leaders, and companies coast to coast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to share with your construction colleagues and help us spread the word by rating, subscribing, and leaving a review on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate it. We'll catch you next time on the Elevate Construction Podcast.